Jean Dorothy Seberg was born on November 13, 1938, in Marshalltown, Iowa. Her father, Edward, ran the town pharmacy. Her mother, Dorothy, was a substitute teacher. The family was Lutheran, Swedish on her father's side, and they lived the kind of life that Marshalltown offered. Decent, stable, church on Sundays, neighbors who knew your business. Seberg later described the adults of Marshalltown as grim, kind, dried-up people who were afraid to open up. She wasn't being cruel. She was being accurate about the gap between herself and her surroundings. She was the second of 4 children. Her older sister, Mary Ann, was 2 years ahead of her. Her younger brothers were Kurt and David. David would die in a car accident at 18, a loss that hit the family hard, but that Jean, already living abroad by then, experienced at a remove that seemed to compound the grief. The distance she'd put between herself and Iowa was already permanent by the time her brother died. As a child, she read constantly. She wrote poetry. She brought home stray animals. She was sensitive in a way that the town's social structure had no particular use for, but she was also genuinely good in school. Honor Society, Drama Society, Girls Y, Mixed Chorus. She became the first teenage chairman of the Iowa March of Dimes campaign. She joined the local NAACP chapter at 14. This was not typical behavior for a white teenager in small-town Iowa in the early 1950s, and it tells you something about who she already was before Hollywood ever found her. She graduated from Marshalltown High School, having played the leads in school productions, and spent a summer doing stock theater in Cape May, New Jersey. She enrolled at the University of Iowa, intending to study dramatic arts, then shifted toward filmmaking. She pledged her older sister's sorority. She was settling into a college life that might have led anywhere. Then her neighbor entered her name into a contest. Otto Preminger was a Viennese-born director who had built a reputation in Hollywood for prestige projects and for being genuinely brutal to the people who worked for him. In 1956, he decided to adapt George Bernard Shaw's St. Joan, and he wanted an unknown face. He organized a nationwide talent search that generated enormous press coverage and drew roughly 18,000 applicants. The publicity machine started before anyone was even cast. Jean Seberg was selected. She was 17, a month shy of her 18th birthday, with no professional experience beyond summer stock. Preminger invited journalists to watch her screen tests. He invited them to watch her long hair get cut for the role of Joan of Arc. Her emotional reaction to losing her hair was filmed and distributed. Her parents' pharmacy in Marshalltown was photographed. Her high school friends were interviewed. Before the film opened, she had been on the cover of Life magazine, and the whole country had been invited to have an opinion about whether Otto Preminger had made a catastrophic mistake. He had, in a narrow sense, and he also hadn't, in a larger one. What he'd actually done was set a teenager up to absorb a critical failure that was partly his own responsibility. On set, Preminger was worse than his reputation suggested. He was verbally abusive toward her throughout production, publicly and consistently enough that her co-stars, including Richard Widmark, who played the Dolphin, were disturbed by what they witnessed. The cast included John Gielgud, Anton Walbrook, and Felix Aylmer, all established British stage actors of real weight. Seberg was an Iowa teenager with no film experience placed opposite them, and then humiliated by her director in front of them. During the climactic burning at the stake scene, a pyrotechnic malfunction set her on fire. She sustained burns on her torso that left permanent scars. The take was used in the final cut. The film opened in May 1957, and the reviews were damaging. Critics went for Preminger's judgment in casting her, and some went directly for her performance, which was genuinely unformed in ways that were hard to separate from what she'd been put through. She was torn apart in print by people who had never had to act while being systematically broken down by their director. She later said, "I am the greatest example of a very real fact, that all the publicity in the world will not make you a movie star if you are not also an actress." She was being hard on herself in public, the way young people do when they've been hurt and are trying to look like they can take it. Preminger cast her again anyway, in Bonjour Tristesse in 1958, this time opposite David Niven. She played a scheming teenager in the south of France, the daughter of a charming widower whose new romance she works to sabotage. The film was based on Françoise Sagan's novel. It was shot partly in Paris and partly on the French Riviera. The American reception was lukewarm, but in France something different happened. French critics and filmmakers looked at her performance and saw something the Americans had dismissed. There was a quality in her. The directness, the lack of calculation, the way she occupied space on screen. that landed differently when you weren't looking for what she was failing to do. One of the people watching was Jean-Luc Godard. Filming Bonjour Tristesse also took her out of America and into a world she found she could breathe in. She married her first husband, François Moroy, a French lawyer and aspiring filmmaker, in 1958 in Marshalltown. She was 19. They moved to Paris. The marriage was over by 1960, but Paris was not. She had found where she belonged, and she knew it. Godard's first feature film, À bout de souffle, Breathless in English, went into production in 1959 and was released in 1960. It is one of the most discussed films in cinema history, partly because of what it did technically. The handheld camera, the jump cuts, the script written morning by morning on the day of shooting, and partly because of what it felt like to watch, which was unlike anything that had existed before it. Seberg played Patricia Francini, an American student in Paris who sells the New York Herald Tribune on the Champs-Élysées while drifting through an ambiguous relationship with a small-time criminal played by Jean-Paul Belmondo. Godard shot in natural light to save money. Seberg wore no makeup in most scenes. Her salary was a sixth of the entire production budget. She and Godard clashed regularly because she was trained in the precise, controlled style of Hollywood production, and his method was to invent things as he went. She found it disorienting. What ended up on screen was something she hadn't entirely intended and couldn't entirely explain. A quality of presence that critics and filmmakers would spend decades trying to articulate. François Truffaut, who had helped develop the script, reportedly said that when Seberg was on screen, you couldn't look at anything else. That isn't a comment about her looks. It's a comment about attention, about whatever it is that some performers have that keeps the eye. She had it, and Breathless is where the world saw it undeniably. She was 21 years old when the film came out. She was already a figure in French New Wave cinema. She was rebuilding her reputation after St. Joan, and she was building a life in Paris that suited her in a way Iowa and Hollywood never had. The short hair from Breathless became a genuine cultural touchstone. People copied it. It looked like it had just happened, which was part of the point. Her divorce from Moroy was finalized in 1960. In 1962, she married Romain Gary. He was one of the most celebrated French writers of his generation, a decorated World War II aviator, a diplomat, a novelist whose work was taught in schools. He was 48 to her 23. He had already lived several lives. Their son Diego was born in 1962, the same year they married. The relationship gave her entry into a Parisian intellectual world that she navigated with more ease than most people expected from an Iowa pharmacist's daughter, because she was genuinely curious and well-read, and never pretended to be something she wasn't. Through the early and mid-60s, she worked steadily across both France and Hollywood. She made films in both languages, moved between both worlds. The one that critical opinion has settled on as her most serious American performance came in 1964 in Lilith, directed by Robert Rossen. She played the title character, a patient in a private psychiatric facility, opposite Warren Beatty. The character is manipulative, sensual, unstable, and in some ways unknowable. Seberg played it with a precision and strangeness that she had never been given the material to attempt before. Gene Hackman appeared in a small role. Peter Fonda was in it. It was Robert Rossen's last film. He died 2 years later. Lilith made little money and was not widely seen. But among the people who watched closely, it confirmed something. She was not just the French New Wave girl with the pixie cut. She was an actual actress who had been given inadequate material for most of her career and had done something extraordinary the one time the material matched her. Throughout this period, the life in Paris was real and satisfying in ways her career sometimes wasn't. She had genuine friends, a child she loved, an intellectual marriage that was complicated but not without its rewards. She was politically engaged. She donated to the NAACP and to Native American causes, including a school near her hometown. She read, she talked, she wrote. She was one of many American expatriates in Paris who had gone there looking for something they couldn't find at home and had actually found it. In the late 1960s, her politics became more visible. She donated to the Black Panther Party, an estimated $10,000 over several years. She was public about her sympathy for Black activist causes at a time when the American government treated such sympathy as a threat to national security. She was not alone in this among Hollywood figures, but she was more open about it than most. J. Edgar Hoover's FBI had been running its COINTELPRO counterintelligence program since 1956. The program's purpose was to identify and neutralize domestic political threats, which in Hoover's framework included civil rights organizations, anti-war activists, and anyone who publicly supported the Black Panthers. Seberg's name went onto the list. Her phones were tapped. She was followed. Her home was broken into. People she thought she could trust reported back to the Bureau. The stated goal in the FBI's own internal documents was her neutralization. Specifically, to cause her embarrassment and serve to cheapen her image with the public, while taking what the memo called the usual precautions to avoid identification of the Bureau. This was not a rogue operation. It was organized, approved, and directed from the top. In early 1970, Seberg was filming in Durango, Mexico. She became pregnant. The father was a Mexican student activist named Carlos Navarra. She and Roman Gary had been estranged for some time by then, though they had not yet divorced. Gary publicly claimed the child as his own. The situation was complicated and private. The FBI saw it as an opportunity. An internal memo dated April 1970, approved by Hoover, authorized agents to feed a false story to gossip columnists in Los Angeles. The story was that Seberg's pregnancy was not her husband's, but was the result of a relationship with a member of the Black Panther Party. The memo was explicit about the goal. It would embarrass her and damage her public image. It suggested the story be planted as if it came from a friend casually gossiping in Paris. On May 19, 1970, the Los Angeles Times gossip columnist Joyce Haber published a blind item about an unnamed actress who supported the Black Revolution and was pregnant. The item ended, "Papa's said to be a rather prominent Black Panther." The details identifying Seberg were clear enough. 3 weeks later, on August 24, 1970, Newsweek published the same story using Seberg's actual name. She read the Newsweek story and went into premature labor. Her daughter, Nina Hart Gary, was born on August 23, 1970. The baby weighed 4 pounds. Nina died 2 days later. Seberg had her daughter's casket opened at the burial service in Marshalltown so that the mourners could see the baby was white. She felt she had to prove it, that she was standing at her infant daughter's funeral, needing to disprove a lie that a government agency had planted in a magazine is the thing that stops you when you sit with this story long enough. It is a specific kind of cruelty that the documents in FBI files confirm was deliberate. She and Gary sued Newsweek for defamation. They won in a Paris court, receiving damages and a retraction. The money and the correction did not undo what had happened. Romain Gary said later that from that year forward, Seberg attempted suicide every year on the anniversary of Nina's death, August 25th. The breakdowns came in waves. She kept working. Airport in 1970 was a large commercial film and a genuine box office hit. But the interior landscape of her life had been fundamentally altered. The FBI surveillance continued. The harassment continued. Her phones were still tapped. She was still followed. She came to know she was being watched and couldn't always be sure by whom. She and Gary divorced in 1970. She married the French director Denis Barry in 1972. That marriage survived legally, but not in practice. The couple separated in 1976. She directed a short film. She worked on writing. She gave interviews that veered between clarity and distress. Her sister Mary Ann said that when she came to visit after the baby's death, Jean was completely distraught, withdrawn, that she was in utter disbelief that her life could be destroyed by something like this. The years between 1970 and 1979 are hard to describe as a coherent narrative because they weren't. They were a long fragmentation. She appeared in films in Europe and occasionally in America. She tried things, started things, put things down. She moved between countries. She struggled with alcohol and medication. The psychiatric hospitalizations came. She remained capable of real warmth and real connection, according to the people around her, but the center wasn't holding the way it once had. In the summer of 1979, she was physically restrained from throwing herself in front of a Paris metro train. On the night of August 30th, 1979, she left her Paris apartment. She had a supply of prescribed barbiturates with her. She was wearing a blanket. Her partner at the time, an Algerian actor named Ahmed Hasni, told police that when he woke up the next morning, she was gone. He told police he had known she was suicidal for some time. 9 days passed. On September 8, 1979, her decomposing body was found wrapped in the blanket in the back seat of her white Renault, parked about 3 blocks from her apartment in the 16th arrondissement. Police found a bottle of barbiturates, an empty bottle of mineral water, and a note. The note was written in French and addressed to her son Diego. It said, in part, "Forgive me, I can no longer live with my nerves." The Paris police ruled her death a probable suicide. The toxicology report showed alcohol levels high enough to induce a coma, which raised the question of whether she could have driven herself to the location at all. The following year, French investigators opened additional charges against persons unknown for failing to assist a person in danger. The case went nowhere. 6 days after her body was found, the FBI released documents under the Freedom of Information Act. Those documents confirmed the defamation campaign against her. They confirmed the memo. They confirmed that Hoover had personally approved planting the false story about her pregnancy. Romain Gary called a press conference and said the FBI had destroyed her. He said she had become psychotic after the smear campaign, that the loss of the baby had broken something that never repaired. He did not use vague language. He named the agency and named what they had done. Gary had 14 months left to live. He died in December 1980 of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He left a note saying it had nothing to do with Jean Seberg. Jean Seberg was 40 years old when she died. She was buried at the Cimetière du Montparnasse in Paris. Her funeral drew 200 people, including her 3 ex-husbands. Her obituary in the New York Times ran to under 500 words. Her hometown of Marshalltown has held an annual Jean Seberg International Film Festival since 2011. The Film Archive in Iowa preserves what documents and photographs remain. In 2019, Amazon released a film about her life with Kristen Stewart in the role. What the FBI did to her is not in dispute. The memos are public. The timeline is confirmed. A government agency decided that a woman donating money to a political organization was a threat serious enough to justify destroying her reputation, which they did by targeting her unborn child. They knew she was pregnant. They waited until the timing was most damaging. They planted a lie in the press and watched it move. The baby died. She never recovered. 9 years later, she was dead. She left behind a body of film work that has been steadily reassessed upward since her death. Breathless most of all, but not only breathless, she left behind a son. She left behind a town in Iowa that is proud of her now in a way it wasn't always sure how to be when she was alive. She left behind FBI files with her name on them that read, in the flat bureaucratic language of institutional violence, like a confession.